Hey, Betsy. Tommy Givens here, the professor of the course. Great to have you, and wanted to send along a video reply to you this first week as we kind of get our conversation started, and also give you some feedback on what you've written in both response forums here in week one, which is excellent, by the way. Appreciate the kind of exploratory, probing approach that you've taken. So hope you can keep that up. In your response in the first forum on who Israel is, I appreciate that you're navigating various tensions. Israel won't really kind of yield to any easy definitions, as you say. We have to hold various tensions together as we describe who Israel is by the light of biblical testimony. And as you say, Israel is not an idealized community or people in the Bible. And this is so important, I think, for understanding God's revelation, especially in Jesus, according to Matthew. Israel doesn't cease to be itself when it is unfaithful. It doesn't have to meet certain conditions to be Israel, you might say. Instead, even when Israel is unfaithful, they remain the people that God shapes by God's election over generations to bear God's memory, name in the world. And that, I think, is key to who Israel is. So when it comes to Jesus in Matthew, he is not going to threaten to abandon people if they don't accept what he says. When he is rejected by certain authorities, by some of his people, by his own disciples, he does warn them. But sometimes Christians have interpreted those warnings as if Jesus were presenting criteria whereby he would disown them. They would not be part of the people of God anymore, or something like that. And that, I think, is just untrue to the Bible's presentation of Israel and of Jesus in Matthew. So you've laid some groundwork here, I think, to track that. And we'll see that, in fact, in some ways, the opposite is true. Jesus is characterized by a deep solidarity with his people in their difficulties, in their injustice, in the curses that they are enduring as a consequence of generations of uh, infidelity to their covenant commitments. So instead of remaining aloof from this baptism happening in the Jordan River by John, this prophet who, as we'll see, is Elijah who was to come, Jesus joins his people in that ritual of repentance, confessing sins, orienting themselves to this coming of kingdom from heaven. And it's precisely in Jesus' solidarity with his people in their sins that uh, God gives him this vision of being anointed by God's Spirit as God's final heir, the human figure who inherits God's ruling power on the earth to bring justice and healing to all of Israel and with it to all the peoples of the world. So that's key to integrate that uh, intimacy of Jesus with his people's suffering and sins, as opposed to thinking that he's come to set up some system where if you agree with him, he accepts you, and if you don't, he rejects you, kind of thing. That's just not who Jesus is by the light of Matthew. And of course, we'll see that in a kind of horrifying intensity in the way that Jesus dies near the end of Matthew. So good stuff here in your first response forum. In the second one, there's a lot I could highlight because I think you've just got some good sort of bullet points about features of the genealogy. But I want to just spend a couple minutes responding to your fine question at the end about the dynamics of a kind of ancient context, historically, culturally, in relation to your own. And I would say that it is important to understand that those two contexts, if we want to call them that, are always related to each other. They're always operating in relationship to one another. There isn't really a way for you to set aside your context and how you've been formed as a person in order to imagine or place yourself in an ancient culture or time. But that said, I think you're right to say that we want to try to be attentive to some of the features of the context that is pictured for us in Matthew's gospel. Some of what I've just said, for example, about the memory of Israel in the Bible, so that we can be invited or enabled to question assumptions that we bring to the narrative of Matthew from our own context. So it's not so much a matter of prioritizing one over the other as always holding them in a kind of healthy tension and allowing consideration of the ancient context from our current perspective to alter our current perspective and to open us to new possibilities for how we understand not only the Jesus as he is living, moving, breathing, speaking in the drama of Matthew, but also that same Jesus as present in our life in a whole variety of ways. So I hope that helps. You'll see in this class that I do try to emphasize certain key particulars about Jesus's context, but not with a view to kind of uh, thinking that Jesus is lost in the past and that to make sense of the Gospels, we have to sort of transport ourselves to understand what Jesus is saying. Instead, we want to just cultivate a kind of openness to some of the difference that is conveyed to us by taking the particulars of the Gospel of Matthew seriously and allowing that to continually reshape our imagination in the present. Hope that helps. And thanks again for some good work in week one. Looking forward to more conversation with you throughout the term.